Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to this afternoon session of the Sheep Health and Welfare Group Conference. Before I start, there's just a few things I'd like to update you on in terms of housekeeping. We're very aware that the polls, the way that the polls ran this morning, didn't work for a lot of people. They certainly didn't work for me. I'm told now that that's been resolved, and we'll look at this in a moment in terms of a bit of guidance as to how you link into the polls and take part. Technical people behind the scenes are very confident that we've got a system that's going to work for you now. So we'll look at that in a moment. But huge apologies for that for people that couldn't get involved within the polling earlier this morning. If people could be, those people that tweet, if you could be as active as you possibly can be, it's a great way of spreading the messages that are coming through this conference. We've got a lot of attendance already, and there's a lot more people that would be interested in what's going on. So do please tweet where you can. And also throughout the afternoon session as well, I'd ask you to be as active as you can on the Q&A and the chat as well. Just keep those questions or comments or views coming through as much as you possibly can. So yeah, good afternoon. I'm Phil Stocker. I'm the Chief Executive of the National Sheep Association, and for my sins, I sometimes think it's just in order to keep my sanity, although sometimes I think it's insanity, but I'm a small-scale sheep keeper as well. And I'm pleased to be here this afternoon, chairing this afternoon's session, which is where we're looking at investigating a future vision for ruminant, mainly sheep, health and welfare in the future. Before I start, I think it would be wrong not to just recognise that we're at a point of transition now where we're moving from SHAWG, the Sheep Health and Welfare Group, to the new Ruminant Health and Welfare Group. And it would be definitely wrong not to recognise the incredible work that a lot of people have put into SHAWG over the last few years. SHAWG has been immensely successful, in my mind, in bringing together most of the stakeholders involved in our industry and sharing knowledge, as well as reconciling views and coming up with agreed positions on many development areas of work as well. It certainly would not have been anywhere near as successful as it has been. And today we've seen the launch of the 2020 SHAWG report, a great achievement and a fantastic report. But we wouldn't have seen the success of the SHAWG group without all the energy and the enthusiasm of everyone that's been involved. And I think I'd like to make a particular mention to two people. There's a lot more I could mention, but two people in particular. One, Peter Baber, who chaired SHAWG from its inception, and also to Charles Sercombe, who took over somewhere in the region of 4 or 5 years ago. I'm also pleased to say that Charles will be staying involved in the new Ruminant Health and Welfare Group. But life never stands still, and we're in the process of huge change, and we're going to see some changes in this area too. And we're in the process now of transitioning SHAWG across to the new Ruminant Health and Welfare Group. And this group, for the first time, is going to bring together both the cattle and sheep sectors for strategic health and welfare development, whilst also aiming to give space for both the sectors, the sheep and the cattle sector, specifically to discuss things that are specific to them. So without any ado, I'd like to introduce you to the new chair of the Ruminant Health and Welfare Group, Nigel Miller. Nigel is a qualified vet and a cattle and sheep farmer in Scotland. He has been involved in a lot of strategic health work in Scotland for many years, and he's also closely involved with the Morden Foundation. And Nigel, I'd like to pass over to you to give us a little bit of background on the Ruminant Health and Welfare Group, please. Thank you.
No, thanks, Phil, and thanks for setting the scene. Thanks to SHAWG for the invitation to join you today. I've had a fascinating morning, and to get this opportunity, I suppose, at the start of the Ruminant Health and Welfare journey, just to map out what we are really hoping for, or our ambition is really useful. So, a big thank you to SHAWG. And I guess Ruminant Health and Welfare is about change. It's about being a catalyst for change, and that's not a new concept by any means. And I think, just a bit like Phil, maybe it's worth pausing to think of where we are today and how we got here. And in reality, SHAWG have, I suppose, changed the sort of landscape in the sheep world. We're in a very different place from where we were 10 years ago. There's a far greater recognition of disease and its impacts, and a more in-depth knowledge about how we should manage it. And if you look at the networks and the partnerships SHAWG have created, we've changed with Scots and Ruma our whole approach to parasite control and to antibiotic use. And that's one of the toughest areas to actually make changes, and yet we're in a totally different place from where we were just a few years ago. And that's an extraordinary achievement those partnerships have made. And I think with SHAWG as well, you've placed health and welfare right at the centre of the political agenda. And we're looking now at structures which, with government that can actually facilitate change and support it. And that's a pretty good springboard for the future. So thanks to those involved. And as I say, we're going to be following a pretty hard act, I think, when we're going to try and move the agenda on at a faster pace. And if we actually probably go on to the first slide, I think, do we probably want to pause a bit and think, oh, sorry, I think, Phil, you wanted to just map out how the polls would work, because
I will.
Quite an important thing. Sorry, I've taken off too quickly.
Yeah, of course, Nigel. Of course I will. And again, they probably picked the most inappropriate people to explain technology to anyone, to be honest. But there's two ways that you can take part in the poll. We're led to believe one is via the web, and if you go to pollev.com/AHDB, you should be able to take part in the poll through that route. But you could also use your mobile phone, and you can text. Use text as well. It says on the instruction here, text a code response to 22333. So if you try that, and if people do want to have two tools in front of them, I guess a laptop and their phone, with a bit of luck, you'll be able to take part in the poll over the phone as well. So I really hope that works for you, and I hope that you find it easy to engage with some of the poll, and it will come up shortly.
Thanks, Phil. Sorry, I'm difficult to control. So you can see that Phil's going to have a real challenge sort of keeping this section up to time. Once the microphone's in front of me, I can't keep my mouth shut. So I'll maybe speed on and just talk a wee bit more about ruminant health and welfare. The focus very much on endemic disease and how we can really, I suppose, look at that more deeply, but push back more quickly on those impacts, not just for production on farm and efficiency, and I hope incomes for those that obviously have invested so much in the industry, but I think also to underpin welfare and to probably look at our climate change obligations as time goes on. Disease is one of those wins. If we can actually push that back, we can gain efficiencies which win in all sorts of areas. So that's what a primary aim. But I think we've also got to be more self-critical about what we do. We've got to look at our welfare standards and try and look at areas which can actually make gains. We owe that, I think, to the animals we care for. But I think the last few months has shown the trust that consumers put in local food and farmers and our sector. And that's a bit of payback for them, that we're actually going to push things forward and remain at the, I suppose, forefront of welfare in the farming world. So that's a second sort of issue which is going to be really high up the agenda. The third issue probably is answering this very uncertain world we're entering and trying to look at structures and health status and welfare status and structure them in such a way that we can access markets and perhaps also get into new export markets as well. And I think that's going to be critical for the industry over the next 2 or 3 years, whatever outcomes we have from the negotiations with the EU. So quite a wide agenda with some pretty distinct aims, but to be delivered over 4 nations. And I think that's a pretty difficult concept just now when the political dynamic is almost fragmenting the UK. We're going in the opposite direction. But in disease terms, it must make sense to try and, I suppose, share best practice, look at standards or benchmarks which actually underpin the whole of our industry within the UK, but also look at collaborative initiatives which can actually move forward both the health and welfare agenda. The other, I suppose, vision or part of our agenda is being a voice for the industry, the whole ruminant sector. And by bringing the sectors together, the hope is there's more weight and there's more focus, and that single voice can actually link in with the CBOs, linking with governments, and they're quite a lever for policy change. Now, I know this is probably the most controversial area in that bringing the sectors together, there's always going to be difficulties in balancing priorities and actually ensuring that the networks and the initiatives which have been, I suppose, kicked off by SHAWG and have been entrusted to us, actually get properly managed. I think within the terms of reference, we've actually built in checks there to ensure that agendas and time is properly apportioned and that the sheep sector is right in there and is a priority in the future. And I think both my Vice Chair, Gwyn, and Caroline Slay, who's the Secretary General, who brings some fresh thought and energy to this new organisation, and Amy Jackson, who's covering our comms, all of us are totally committed to that balance and making sure that we deliver for both sectors. And I think we can just move on to the next slide, which really shows the basis of our steering group, which is really wide-ranging, and I think it's probably the powerhouse behind the organisation, and their response over the last weeks and as we've developed, gives me real confidence that some of the ambitious targets that we've aspired to can actually be delivered. I'm not sure whether we can get that next slide or not. Are we frozen? Or yeah, there we go. And the people that actually represent these organisations are sitting there as individuals, bringing their own thoughts and experience to the process, but they're also a bridge into these organisations, which are vital to actually hold together and add value to what we do. So, pretty important group. That's the core of the organisation. There will be subgroups, and there's also a Four Nations group, a small, very sort of fluid group, which will try and ensure that the Four Nations interaction is action driven and looks at key areas that we can actually make change. Let's just move on to the next slide, which I think just underlines what our aims and priorities are for the next period of sheep development. And let's just click on to the next slide, which I think is really, I suppose, borrowed from CHAWG and the CHAWG report. I really love this graphic. It's a fantastic sort of map of where our industry should go. And I think it's a challenge to the Ruminant Health and Welfare to actually deliver on these challenges or these priorities. But I think it's also frighteningly a tool to benchmark our success. So a year or two down the line, perhaps you can look at this and see whether we really have delivered. We can just move on to the next slide now. And this is really my passion, which I guess is trying to ensure that Ruminant Health and Welfare is close to the industry, is part of the industry, is part of farming, part of the farming community, is there for farm vets. And we actually have a two-way relationship, and we're there to deliver for that community. And this is, I suppose, the first step in that road. And it's about prioritisation. And there's all sorts of organisations and expert groups that have, mapped out priorities. But what we're really trying to do is to reach out to the grassroots, I suppose, and see what their views are. You'll get their feedback on what really matters to them, what matters to their business, and what they think is our national priorities. But also look at the local issues. And there are real local issues for the sheep sector, without a doubt. Different localities do have different challenges. So I want to capture both of those. And the basis of the survey options are from expert groups. They're from climate change disease groups. And I guess that's a good proxy for carbon efficiency or biological efficiency, and also economic efficiency. So there is some rationale about them. There's also some diseases scattered in there which are local diseases, things like food sensitization, triclobendazole resistance, things like this, which for some areas are a real challenge. So you've got a bit of choice there. We can just click on to the next slide and at a time thinking about the diseases in the survey, because I'm really keen that we get a really good response and that you're enthused and actually share your thoughts and experience. And this is really just a map of where we are on some recent surveys. And Ben Strugnell's survey in Darlington, followed Stockyard, is an amazing bit of work, really. And I suppose it was a route for people who, sorry, I'm shouting at you, running out of voice. People getting the chance to check out problems on farm which maybe otherwise would have gone unrecorded. And then there's SAC's a map of their surveillance, and there is quite a cross match there. Parasitic disease obviously an issue, but the actual OPA, Yagsikte, Johne's disease, these iceberg diseases creeping in and becoming quite an issue. And Listeria crops up there. It's not something that crops up on many priority lists, and people dismiss it because we make lousy silage. And probably I fall into that category and make those mistakes. But it is a continuing issue, and we shouldn't ignore it. Let's move on. And this is really what we're worried about, and it's looking at the iceberg diseases, which, if you're speaking to farmers, is often in the conversation. And that's really just highlighting the sort of prevalences and levels there are. OPA in Scotland, a big issue just now. And figuring about 5 or 6% in quite a lot of surveys on some farms, being a significantly more grave issue. Johne's interests me because I've got Johne's, and I regard it as a grumbling problem which I could do without. But I think there's real data there from HDB which shows that once you get an intensive flock with significant numbers of Johne's infections, you can actually start losing longevity, and the number of ewes that go into fourth crop can be as low as 17%. So it is an important disease, and Maidavicina is I suppose, creating hotspots across the UK. There's figures for Gloucestershire, but in the Scottish borders, there's real issues as well. Border disease, the HDB gave me a kicking for not putting this high priority. In Scotland, it's regarded as fairly rare and insignificant. In England, it's a significant issue. So, and as we go through BVD eradication in cattle, it will probably get more important. But let's just batch on. And this is really looking at a slide, which are just common things which occur, and again, don't often figure on priority lists, but they cause real pain on farm, and nobody can doubt the discomfort and pain of ORF, and nobody can discount the misery that mastitis causes. But these actually have big impacts on production efficiency, and you can see the losses in lamb weights that follow on from these conditions. Let's just kick on because we're burning too much time. And this is looking at the science side. This is looking at VIDA's data, which is a compilation of data from surveillance, looking at what really does impact on the industry. And you can see there that parasitic impacts are right at the top of the list. And some of those common sort of sheep diseases that we've got quite good vaccines for, pasteurellosis and Clostridia are still there. So that gives you a bit of an overview, and hopefully gets you excited about disease and death, and gets you to go to our website and share your views, because we need to feed off your thoughts and your priorities. And I think that probably takes us to the end of that section. We're now going to a more interactive phase, which Phil will pilot, and it'll be a bit more interesting because I won't be droning on so much. Phil, have you got thoughts, or do I think you're going to go through this technology here, so I wish you well.
Absolutely. So this should show people how they link into the polls. We've explained it once already. We're going to be in your hands, really. But yeah, if you go via the web to pollev.com, and then you enter AHDB, or you might just / AHDB, and that should take you to the polls. If you want to use your mobile phone, it looks like we're up now. So if you can take a look at this poll, there's 1 to 7 different options, and what we're talking about here is syndromes. Nigel, do you just want to? This is a new bit of phraseology that's crept in me. It's come largely from you. Once I've read it once or twice, I understand exactly what you mean. But can you just explain to the layperson, i.e. me, what you mean by syndromes? Thank you.
Could we click back to the last slide, because I'm pretty good at confusing people. Oh, it's not there. I thought there was one. Oh, there it is. Defining syndromes, and this is a very clumsy sort of term, really, because it's not real syndromes, and vets and scientists really dislike my abuse of the term. But what I'm actually talking about is I suppose grouping conditions or impacts or diseases together, which occur at a certain point in the production cycle. So that rather than looking at individual diseases, we look at down the production cycle and we see where the real stress points are, the real problems are, and we can actually map that through in, as I call, syndromes, right through the production cycle. So you can start at the early production cycle and reproductive efficiency, and reproductive efficiency would include fertility, abortion, stillbirth, that sort of thing. And that's one, I suppose, point which actually defines key performance indicators, I suppose, as well. So the syndrome is really quite complex, but it has a really wide and deep effect on the efficiency of the system. And if you go further on, there's perinatal or neonatal mortality of lambs. That's often a big number, and it can have a real effect on our lambing percentage and the lambs sold. So again, that's another point, another syndromic area, which affects your key performance indicators. And if you go further on, you can look at issues like thin ewe syndrome or your premature culling of ewes. You can look at the performance of lambs on grass, which probably reflects your parasite burdens and challenges and control, and also things like cobalt. Now, all these syndromes are multifactorial, so that if you want to make progress on them, you've actually got to do an investigation and look at the components that are there. And some of those may be nutrition and genetics, and we looked at those important factors this morning. But there's a whole range of factors, so that to push them back, you need a package of measures. But if that package of measures work, you get real payback. And if you just tackle a single disease, you might get 2 or 3% payback. If you can actually tackle one of these syndromes, in some areas you could get a 10% payback for your effort. So
Right.
That's why we're interested in syndromes, to see whether it's a tool that we could use to upgrade the performance of our systems.
Mhm.
Hopefully that helps.
And with that explanation, you can see that it's really it could be really beneficial and helpful to be able to cluster diseases around some of our key performance indicators. That's what we're talking about doing, isn't it? It's about maybe using benchmarking and key performance indicators to find out where those hotspots are, and then really investigate to see what the health or disease problems that might be affecting those KPIs.
That's great, Phil. I think that's a lot more succinct than I was, and a bit clearer. So
Sorry.
I think you've convinced me it's a good idea now.
It makes sense to me now. Anyway, let's we move on to the poll, and should we slip on to the next? So hopefully people.
Yeah, try the technology.
Here we go.
There are people already doing it.
That's interesting, isn't it? So obviously, reproductive failure it's joint first now, along with neonatal lamb diseases and mortality. Yeah.
Quite interesting that the growing lamb challenges, the joint ills and the tick-borne diseases, you're scoring very low there, and sometimes because those are so visible and they're so disheartening when they happen, you tend to over prioritize them. But I think in many ways, certainly things like joint ill and ORF, where there's a good vaccine, we can actually handle those reasonably well. I think people have hooked into some of the areas which are a real challenge for us.
Absolutely. And again, there's quite a broad spread, as you'd expect, I guess, isn't there, really? But the two key winners in that poll, I guess, are about producing lambs, getting lambs on the ground to begin with. Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. But the last two are quite interesting as well, because they've scored quite high, that suboptimal lamb performance. And I think we've all been there, having lambs with a lot of promise. And then when they go onto grass, when they're weaned, they slow down a bit. And some of that may be grazing management. But I think, parasite control parasites and cobalt can cause some pretty unfortunate impacts. And again, culling ewes and premature culling of ewes, a real issue for quite a lot of us, and something that we've probably got to work a bit harder on. But that's pretty fascinating. I think we've got a slide next from Morden, have we? Yeah, this was just last week, and this was Morden and Livestock Health Scotland looking at greenhouse gas diseases. And the idea of this workshop was to actually look at diseases or syndromes that if you actually target them or push them back, you could actually reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from the sector by 10%. That was the target. And part of that process was then to I suppose, create a hierarchy of syndromes and a hierarchy of diseases in the working groups. And you can see that neonatal disease and reproductive performance were the top two, and cheek syndromes as well. And suboptimal performance at grass, which again, I think was 16% in our poll, was it? Quite high. So we've actually got almost total agreement over the syndromes that could be important for the sector. And I've put in the individual diseases that they think are ones that we should be tackling in climate change terms. And they might be of interest as well, but I'll not go through that.
Nigel, there's a couple of questions that have come in, Nigel. It relate to the poll, which are really quite interesting. The first one is, which syndrome would you classify parasites within? That's quite an interesting question, and I can think of an answer, but I'd like the answer to come from you, really.
Well, I think the obvious one, the parasites one, is suboptimal performance on grass. But the reality is that it overlaps into reproductive performance without a doubt, and it overlaps into thin ewe syndrome. And even if that thin ewe isn't culled, if she goes into tupping at suboptimal or a low condition score, the whole track of that pregnancy, her fertility, and the viability of our lambs are compromised. And you end up with a real challenge in the last 6 or 8 weeks or 12 weeks running up to lambing, with trying to, I suppose, almost have a fire brigade approach to nutrition to try and salvage that ewe and hold up her energy and protein intake to successfully lamb. So maybe I've fudged the question, but I think there's three here that I think are key.
Yeah, and again, from a most simplistic point of view, parasites could probably fall under a number of those different syndromes too, couldn't they?
I think so, and I think probably looking back at the last I suppose slides on diseases, and even looking at the modern priority diseases, you can see that PGE and liver fluke are right up there, and although they're, I suppose, part of our normal day-to-day life, that we actually manage these challenges, maybe sometimes we don't realize how deep their impact is and how important it is that we are successful. And some of that success is through strategic interventions. I think in the future it may well be, certainly in PGE and nematodirus, is actually turning back a page to the 1980s, where people were really concerned about the level of challenge and looking at clean grazing systems. And I know that some people on paddock grazing systems now have clean grazing blocks, but I think as time goes on, minimizing that challenge and providing clean grazing is going to be a real passport to high performance.
And here's another really interesting one. Will the syndrome that has the biggest impact not depend on each individual farm?
I'm sure it will, and absolutely it will, because some of these syndromes, I suppose an obvious one would be reproductive efficiency. If you have unmanaged enzootic abortion getting into a flock, all of a sudden your reproductive efficiency, I suppose, falls down a cliff, really. So individual farm, that would become an overwhelming priority. In other situations, neonatal or early lamb mortality can actually be a real challenge, and it could be. I think this morning it was kind of laid on the line that what happens one year doesn't necessarily happen the next. I think that's definitely true, but I think there are some occasions that environmental, nutritional, or disease factors
and Nigel
come together, and the losses around lambing time can be really quite devastating. No, on you go, please.
And in a way, there's definitely a relationship with in that point with some of the discussions that were held this morning, in that it must make sense for the industry to have generic targets and KPIs for the industry as a whole. Yet it's really important beneath that or within that for individual farms to understand what's going on and have their own KPIs that contribute to those national ones as well.
I think that's, as you say, very much leading on from this morning, and I would totally agree with that sort of summary. And by having, the sort of national flock benchmarks and your own individual ones, that's quite a nice way to balance in your mind how you're progressing. But it does give you the option to work with your vets or advisors to focus on the thing that really matters to your flock, because getting change in one area is really possible and can happen quite quickly. If you try and target 2 or 3 areas at the same time, it becomes really quite difficult to manage. So step by step, we can jack up performance, and individual KPIs make perfect sense.
Another comment has come through, which is a really sound statement in my mind. How many of these diseases or syndromes linked to poor nutrition, i.e. can we tackle some, such as PGE, by getting nutrition sorted? Nutrition is fundamental. Nutrition is fundamental, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think, again, this morning, it was quite clear that, the nutritional status and body conditions score of ewes has a really significant impact on the level they shed at, and the contamination of the pasture. But I think that nutrition and protein intakes in lambs can have a really significant impact on their ability to their resilience, their ability to withstand challenge and build up resistance over time. And obviously that increasing interest as well in herbs and mixed forages, again, for lambs can be quite a synergistic sort of tool to underpin not just nutritional performance, but also their ability to handle parasitic challenge.
There's one very quick and specific point relating to this slide that's up at the moment about the Morden workshop, and that is, why is Yonis under a lowland disease and not hill and upland?
I think it probably almost links back to the HGB work, which tended to show that, or the data that they collected, which tended to show that Yonis became more of a problem in more intensive situations. So that although Yonis is going to be present in many upland and hill flocks, because they probably aren't lambing inside and their low stocking intensities, it doesn't actually take hold to the same extent in the flock as it would in a more intensive situation. And I think that probably reflects that factor. I'd probably fall into the hill and upland sort of category. And as I say, I have a Yonis issue. It tends to grumble away at 2 or 3 sheep a year, which tend to lose weight and may be required to be prematurely culled. Probably quite young sheep, which is a bit disheartening. I have vaccinated in the past, and having looked at these figures recently, I'm wondering whether I should go back to vaccinating. But there is an escape route there and I think SAC have just brought out a monitoring package, not just for Yonis but for MV as well. And this is a fairly low cost package, which might actually be pretty useful if those that are producing breeding stock engage with it, because it would start to give those that rely on ewe lambs or draft ewes or gimmers a source of safe animals or low risk animals. And we need that, I think, for the future.
Absolutely. I'll just ask one more question before we move on. Why are we trying to compartmentalize? That's a tough one. Why are we trying to compartmentalize the issues when on a sheep farm, all of these issues have to be covered and decided on which is their individual priority? Isn't there more progress to be gained by looking at the flock holistically? I think we would agree with that, probably.
I think you've got to look at the flock holistically, but I think if we want to, as I say, make progress or focus our management efforts, it's good to know where the key strengths and weaknesses are in the production cycle, so that we can focus effort where we think we can make improvements.
Yeah, great. Okay, let's move on to the next one. I'll just say that there's some of those questions have restored my faith in the audience, given that the very first question was, have Nigel and Phil been to the same shop to buy their wall paint? But the following questions have restored my faith in the audience, and we'll move on to the second poll, which is really to select the syndrome which you feel has the greatest impact on animal welfare this time.
Yeah, well, these are the same syndromes again, and it's really just highlighting that there are welfare implications of these syndromes. So it's a similar list. You're familiar with it. So it's a matter of prizing out the ones which are a real welfare priority. And while you're doing that, you can enjoy the red wallpaper.
So that's interesting. Again, there's still votes coming in. Anything behind poor U condition, thin U syndrome, is scoring well ahead of the rest at the moment.
Yeah, it is really, slightly surprised how well ahead it is, because some of these conditions in late pregnancy can be was quite unpleasant, really, and disheartening, but obviously are not a positive experience for the youth either.
I mean, it's interesting too, isn't it? There is no answer to this really, but is short-term severe welfare issue worse than a longer-term ongoing welfare effect? And I guess anything that lies behind thin U's can sometimes have very long-lasting and even generational welfare impacts.
I think that's true, and we tend to forget that this is quite a long-term impact on the sheep, which in some cases, I suppose can lead to mortality. So it certainly isn't a good place to be. And maybe our poll today reflects that, and maybe that's quite a thoughtful way of balancing the priorities.
And going back to some of those earlier questions as well, some of the factors behind thin U's. I mean, we've got iceberg diseases, fluke, and various conditions that lead to premature culinary youth, but certainly PGE, poor nutrition. There's a whole range of stuff that lies behind
that. I think so, and I think your feet are obviously an issue. Your lameness is a key welfare issue, but it's also an issue that badly damaged feet ends up with animals being prematurely culled. So that factors in there as well, and it is an important one, for two reasons. One, the actual condition itself, but also its long-term impact in welfare terms.
There's a couple of questions that have come in, Nigel, on lameness. One is that lameness isn't on that list, and the second one is where would you place foot rot and CODD on the impact on welfare scale? Is lameness a syndrome in itself, or does lameness contribute to these syndromes?
I think, in reflection, probably lameness, might have been a syndrome, a standalone syndrome in itself. The reason that it wasn't picked up was that the focus was trying to fix it to part of the production cycle, so that we could focus on a key part of the production cycle. If it is picked up here, I would guess that it's in the thin U syndrome, iceberg disease condition sort of area. It could also fit into conditions of late pregnancy, because I think sadly lameness contributes to metabolic issues, nutritional issues, and probably contributes to lambs which are subnormal in weight and have a poor life chance. So, and it certainly contributes to mastitis as well. So quite wide-ranging impacts, lameness. The hope is that CODD is a real challenge. And as far as foot rot goes, the use of vaccine and the use of more targeted intervention, treatments of lameness, I think have had a real, created a real revolution in the prevalence of lameness in a lot of flocks. And I would hope that that sort of approach is going to be more widely adopted, and lameness will not be quite the same challenge that we've seen in the last, I suppose, 50 years.
It is quite thought-provoking, isn't it, to look at this and to actually, it does make you think that we probably haven't got a very good way of measuring the impact on, or the effect of animal welfare, or the impact of problems on on animal welfare, and how would you make a decision about what was worse for welfare around some of these things? Measuring that is really difficult.
It is, and I think it was something that came up in a meeting with the CVOs that as a new group we should be looking for indicators or benchmarks to actually try and clarify where the or how you'd score welfare in various situations. And I think that is a real challenge. Other organisations and researchers are looking at that. It would be really helpful if we had a consensus across the industry how we could quantify welfare issues. Reflecting again a bit on the syndromes, perhaps we've been a bit lazy and we've used the same syndromes which were really created to look at production efficiency. Maybe you almost need a different list of syndromes for welfare, and maybe that would make it a bit easier to unpick what is important and what isn't.
And Nigel, we're talking here really about health, disease, parasite infestation. Someone's made the point here about what about issues such as tail docking, castration? Again, when we think about welfare, we probably need to be thinking much more broadly, don't we? We are focusing here on health and parasites, parasite control, but things like tail docking, castration. I would even add to that, things around dog attacks on sheep, and live transport would be another one. Non-stun slaughter. There's a whole range of issues that need to be balanced against this, I guess, in terms of just considering animal welfare.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think those are certainly your priorities. They're certainly right up there in the public's mind, and in a way they're how they perceive our industry as well through those sort of concerns. In Ruminant Health and Welfare, as you're aware, we've got a separate process ongoing on welfare, which actually pose these questions to all our stakeholders. What are the real welfare challenges, but what are also the real welfare strengths in our industry and our sectors? And there's some of the factors that the questioner has actually highlighted, and the ones you've highlighted, came back in that. And I think we've got a whole process on welfare we've actually got to go through. And at the moment we haven't made firm plans, but I think the idea is to maybe have workshops to look at these various areas, not just looking at disease, but looking at management interventions and environmental standards, and see where our strengths and weaknesses are in welfare, and what sort of targets we should have for the future. Hopefully that workshop approach means that we can involve a wider spectrum of people in the process.
There's a number of comments that have been made around lameness, foot rot, CODD, and I think probably going forward we need to make sure that we build that condition, I guess, into this way of thinking. I don't think there's anything else we need to add to that, but I think there's been a number of comments around that, and I think we probably need to mention it at least, really.
Well, that's really useful, and that's what this is all about.
Absolutely,
identifying what's useful and where the gaps are, and that's really useful.
So another question or comment here: we have some pretty good knowledge areas around all of these conditions and syndromes, and SCOPS and AHDB are both mentioned there. In light of Jasmeet's presentation this morning, are we getting our model of knowledge exchange wrong?
I think knowledge exchange is one of the most difficult and challenging things to get right, and it's probably quite encouraging that so many people are confronting this just now, and we're using social scientists to try and understand what the thought processes were. I think that simple approaches of suggesting that if something is cost effective, people will immediately adopt them. I don't think that's proven not to work. People farm for a whole spectrum of reasons, and they value different, I suppose, endpoints or standards within their business, and we've got to try and hook into that. I think the other danger is actually talking down to people and thinking that we can, I suppose, come up with some sort of training course or solution, and if people want to do that, then the job's done and the world will change. That clearly doesn't work. And I think that certainly in Scotland, monitor farms and focus farms have been an amazing sort of, I suppose, period of knowledge development and development of farm systems, and they've really created focuses of real expertise and real enthusiasm, and that's a bit of real value. But in some ways, that acts as a barrier because a lot of farmers who work part time or who haven't been involved in it always feel excluded from the process or feel that their farm system, doesn't relate to these high flyers. And again, we need to have systems where the whole community feels able to engage. I haven't come up with any solutions. I've come up with a problem. Maybe Phil, you have thought about this. Maybe you've got solutions.
Well, I think that there's a whole additional conference that could be held on this subject alone, to be honest. And it was something that came through to me in so many of this morning's presentations, really, about, we've got, I don't know how many people involved here today, but, you can bet your life that all the farmers that are involved here today are those that are almost converted. They're bought into a lot of this thinking and they're already on the journey. But how we engage that much wider group of farmers is another challenge. And I mean, several people, I know Kevin mentioned it earlier, and so did Claire Wise. This is all about it's about people's attitude, really. It's about the attitude and the way that they think about what's going on the farm, and that leads to pride, and that leads to an improvement in practice. And it is about engaging people. And of course, everyone, I guess, communicates in slightly different ways, really. But someone else has made a really interesting point. It's right and correct for us to be talking about these issues, but it's also worth to gauge them or measure them against how the public and our marketplace would perceive welfare as well. How would some of these issues be perceived by the public? And again, someone has mentioned the fact AHDB is already working at the moment on tracking consumer perception. What do the public think about seeing lame sheep? About the way we transport sheep. Just what they see, the way that sheep are being kept, really. So there is work going on that, and it's an area of work that we certainly can't afford to ignore. Welfare is right for us to be considering, but we've got to be able to see this through the public's eyes as well.
I think that's absolutely true, and it's quite easy to live in our own bubble, and that's not good enough. And I'm very guilty of that. I've I suppose lived in the farming world all my life, and you tend to think that you know best, or our community knows best, and the standards that we aspire to are right. But I think that we've got to listen to the public as well, and make sure that things are transparent with what we do, and they're done well.
I think some of that there's been a question posted about do we know what the biggest issues are in terms of welfare in consumers' eyes, and I think AHDB are in the middle of some of that work, and I think we're expecting that to come out sometime soon. But there is research work going on in terms of the public's perception of or concerns over animal welfare. The question here about assisted lambings, it really concerns me how accepted caesareans and assisted lambings can be in some breeds, and how prize rams may actually have been born in this way. That's another interesting question.
Yeah, well, I have to say I have some sympathy for that, or that concern. Not just from the welfare point of view, but just the principle that these genetics are going to be used on, commercial flocks, or are going to go down a pyramid to commercial flocks, and good lambing characteristics must be, a key part of, whether it be a maternal or a terminal sire. Introducing genetics which make that more difficult is can't be sensible or valuable in production efficiency or welfare. And maybe Phil, maybe you're more diplomatic than me, but I certainly have concerns.
I don't know. Someone's made a comment: doesn't the watchful eye of the shepherd have the greatest impact on welfare? Again, that comes down to that point that we mentioned just a few moments ago about people's attitude and their interest and their attention to detail, I guess. One of the biggest impacts is misinformation, e.g. spraying Alomycin spray in sheep's eyes, farmers putting uterine prolapses back, not using lube, etc., etc. It's been interesting over the last few years, I guess, with sheep farming getting a lot more coverage on entertainment TV, I guess. Some of the things we see. And again, it's quite interesting to me in that respect, how some of the things that we see probably wouldn't be acceptable to us, and yet they would be in the eyes of the public in those areas. Again, things just aren't consistent in that world, I don't think.
I think we did get a few words from the HDB at the last meeting we had about public perception of welfare, and it was. I think this is an interim sort of report, really, but they had actually looked at the public view on things like tail docking and tail docking pigs as well, and there was a level of trust there that the public, or a big percentage of the public, felt that if farmers or stockmen felt that it was of value or had welfare positive in the long term, they were willing to go with it, which was quite surprised me, but it actually shows a level of trust or understanding of the industry, which I thought might not be there.
Again, there's so many really good questions and comments coming through. I wish I'd never asked people to be so active on posting comments, but no, it's great to see it. So please keep doing that. But there's an interesting question here, I guess, around welfare in transport and welfare in slaughter. We know that DEFRA are going to come out with a consultation probably this side of Christmas in terms of transport and journey times. But again, we at the moment are talking about the Ruminant Health and Welfare Group. Will we be looking at things such as welfare at slaughter and transport? Does that come under our remit?
I think that certainly, transport, would come under our remit, and that to a degree farmers almost determine, when that happens and how it happens. So I think we've got to take responsibility. How deeply we get into slaughter, I'm honestly not sure. I think that would be determined by the group's view. But clearly for the public and for many farmers, ensuring that the slaughter process is humane and well supervised at all stages is absolutely crucial. And the veterinary profession, have a key role there. I think that the debate is a viable one, and we've really got to go through it, I think.
Absolutely. I think we need to move on, actually. I mean, there's fantastic comments being made. We will capture all those comments and they will be made use of. So apologies to anyone who's made comments and we've not made use of them. But we ought to move on, I think, and go to the next section, which is really looking at flock performance. And Nigel's got a snatchy little title for this one.
I haven't. This was Amy came up with the paralysis by analysis, and I loved it. I thought it was a great title, but it's actually not what I was thinking at all. What I was thinking was that we have quite a lot of data on farm, and do we use it well? And I suppose what's bothering me more is being asked to record more when often there's quite a lot of data on farm which we don't use well enough now. So let's just click on to the next slide. This is really looking at the sort of data which we've said here. These are performance measures, but they're really looking at the sort of data that we all have. That's provided we scan. These are numbers that maybe we don't have them in one place, but if we look through our records, we can unearth these. And it's just, I suppose, asking, how many of us actually use this data? And if we do, what are the three most important factors that we can pull out of that on-farm data?
So, Nigel, are we going to go through these? Have we got 3 polls now in fairly quick succession? And then we'll have another discussion afterwards. Is that right? So let's pick up some. Yep.
Yeah, I think so. I think we probably would, because what we're doing is we're going through these performance indicators, and then we're going to see how that might fit into a planning process or interacting with veterinary health planning.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the first stage, really, the sort of measures that we have and we all worry about, I suppose, and how we value them.
Mm-hmm. And this is about assessing flock performance, isn't it? Again, it's an interesting word, isn't it? Flock performance. Can't even say that. Flock performance. We often talk about productivity, and again, in the past, I think a lot of people would have viewed productivity as being almost volume output, but increasingly, we're thinking our productivity simply meaning a measure of efficiency and profitability of our enterprises. So.
Yeah, and I think that your efficiency is going to become, I think, more heavily weighted as time goes on, for various reasons, and that it may well be a better economic indicator, and it may well be in climate change terms, maybe more valid. But I think in welfare terms, maybe it's quite important as well, because some people are really well set up for handling high scanning rates, but in reality, if you look at the data in total, once you get over 170% lambing percentage, your lamb mortality tends to rise. And if that's the case, we've really got to look at scanning rates and try and make sure they fit the system, so that we don't see that factor kicking in.
And it's people are thinking about this quite seriously, aren't they? Because obviously scanning has come in as number one, and then ewe or lamb mortality is number two. You would say lambs sold are lagging behind a little bit, but of course, if you've got good scanning rates and you've got a low level of mortality, then the number of lambs sold is going to be reasonable, isn't it?
I think you've explained it, Phil. But as I say, I'm quite surprised that lambs sold isn't right at the head of the pack. But logically, I think people are right. Scanning and ewe and lamb mortality probably are a big part of the story and what really matters.
That's great. Should we move on to the next one? Is it good? Yeah.
And this is I don't know whether this is how useful this is, but it's really just trying to screw things down a bit tighter to see if there's one performance factor that you would think would guide your management priorities.
So which single measure is the most useful which single measure, the only one, just choose one, is the most useful indicator of performance?
But I think it might also be the one that you use to drive your management goals. So I'm not sure how useful this is, but it'd be interesting to see if we do come up with a very strong contender.
It's difficult. All of these they do relate, don't they? Lambs sold. Yeah, I'm not surprised about that. Really, I think that's where my vote would have been if I'd have voted.
I think it'd be hard to deny that one. Really, it's a key one. Really, having said that, it might be that certain people, because of their production system, look at some of these other characteristics as being particularly important. But I can see that lamb sold is growing and weight in the equation. So
even that has got to be within accepted KPIs for the actual farm or the business itself, isn't it? It's
absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
It's got to be optimum, isn't it? Really, rather than a maximum to an extent.
Yeah,
that's interesting, but it's a very, very clear winner.
I suppose it does, or these two polls have actually shown that quite a small number of data sets that we have on farm are the ones which really drive things or are really used or valued. The others, I suppose in specific situations, you might fall back on them to actually delve down into why your overall performance is at such a level. But there are 2 or 3 factors which overwhelm the rest.
Just while we're just discussing this, there was a question that came in earlier about the relationship between all of this, I guess, and greenhouse gas output. And you would say that almost without exception. I can't think of any other examples where this wouldn't be the case, but anything that you can do to improve performance, to reduce losses, to increase efficiency is going to have a direct beneficial impact on your carbon footprint or your environmental footprint.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. So you've got things totally in sync, really, that these positives for production efficiency and for better health are actually the same things which are delivering carbon efficiencies.
There's a comment or a question that's come in. Define is a fantastically short question. Define performance ? And again, we talked about that just a little bit, but again, it'd be worth a quick discussion about it. I think ultimately, that definition, it came through in Michael Gove's Health and Harmony consultation paper, which was about the challenge on the industry to improve its productivity. Productivity is a level of as a measure of performance, and productivity is about increasing margins, optimizing the gap between the output and the value of the output and the costs associated with the enterprise. That, in my mind, is performance.
I think that's true. It's a very sort of conservative party model you've adopted there, because I think there are other outputs that sheep production support, and some of those would be environmental and community-based and societal. So I think that if you're a government, you probably should be taking those into account. But I would totally accept your definition of efficiency. But I think if we're talking about performance, in some ways the poll has actually told us the answer, because the majority of people think the number of lambs sold is performance. And I think that if you put that in the context of your system and the environment you work in, that isn't a bad, simple definition, really.
Should we skip on to the next poll?
Yeah, let's do. And this is, I suppose, sneaking us towards how we work with our advisors and our vets, and what's the relationship we have, and if they are actually involved in a proactive way with the flock. So it's really asking what you do with this data, whether you keep it on farm and you use it yourself, or whether you actually are thinking that you need to share it with your vet or your flock advisor. And likewise, vets, and I did speak to a couple of quite sheep orientated vets recently about this, and I got a surprising answer. So asking whether vets actually do get this data or they ask for it.
Okay.
That covers advisors as well. So we're quite interested to see whether there is a real flow.
So for the producers, so the majority are saying that yes, they share this information with the vet or flock advisor. And for the vets and advisors, some of their clients share this with me.
Yeah, I think it's pretty impressive, really, the amount of sharing that's going on. I didn't think it would be quite so high. It doesn't surprise me, this, Nigel, because I would imagine that we've got more farmers here in this audience that would be engaged in working closely with their vets and advisors. There's probably going to be a lot of vets and advisors out there who have got clients that wouldn't naturally work in this way, I guess. So you'd probably expect that, wouldn't you? I suppose I think that's probably a bit of a sense test of where we are today. We've got a section of the community which are very open to proactive health management, and it's reflected in this data. But I still think it's pretty good. I think it's quite impressive, and it looks as if if you look at the bias there, maybe in some ways producers are actually initiating or are active partners in this process.
And there'd still be a lot of producers, and it looks like there is within this audience as well, really, that wouldn't necessarily have an advisor or a consultant. It doesn't mean to say that they're not doing their own business plan and KPIs and all sorts, and still their relationship with their vet isn't close enough for it to be an advisory or a very close advisory relationship. Yes.
I think that's true, and I don't think people should be ashamed of that. I think there's a lot of farmers doing a fantastic job, and you aren't using veterinary inputs. The reality is that this is, traditionally this hasn't been a tool that we've used in the sheep sector, and I think vets as well. Their world has often been driven by fire brigade work, and they probably haven't invested in the advisory role to the same extent. Maybe they will in the future.
Someone's made a comment, we don't have a specialist sheep vet, so although we have regular clinic session, they're not really interested in looking at data. So again, that is a comment that you would have probably heard a lot more a few years ago than you hear now. I mean, things are improving, but we've still got a long way to go, I think, in that area. I think the flock health clubs have really helped in that respect, and we are, now starting to see more farmer networks, farmer to farmer learning. Some people call them stable schools, but just that, that coming together to share advice, to discuss results and think about what people can do to move things forward.
Yeah. I think it is the foundation of proactive health planning for vets to actually be aware of these sort of KPIs and have a conversation with their clients. Without them, it's quite difficult to focus advice, I think.
Again, this is a question that is, it's not the first time this one's been asked, but assuming the top 50% of sheep farmers attend webinars and conferences and are keen on using data to improve flock performance, how can the bottom 50% be dragged to improve rather than carry on with the norm, or should they be left to fall away?
I think that's a sentiment that's, and I suppose frustration that's often voiced. I suppose I go back to what I said. I think there's some people that aren't engaged in these sort of devices who are actually doing a good job. I think that probably things like flock clubs or health club structures in a community setting or a local level are a way of breaking through to people and a wider number of farmers, and hopefully by doing that, the percentage that are involved, with a proactive approach will increase, but it means you need vets that are willing to get out there and recruit, but also have the expertise not just to input in health terms, but also to judge in technical performance and nutrition as well, because nutrition is absolutely fundamental. I'm not suggesting that vets should be nutritionists, but they should certainly be aware if there's a potential problem.
I mean, you do sense that some of the changes that we're going through at the moment, with the agriculture bill and a completely new raft of farm support programs and the phasing out of the basic payment scheme, that we will be nudging in that direction anyway. That there'll be an expectation that our livestock enterprises and farming enterprises can stand on their own 2 feet, and there'll be a reward for delivering high quality public goods. And if you in the future you sense that if you don't buy into all of that, you will have to survive on your own. And some people will carry on and they'll be able to survive on their own for a long time to come yet. But again, it will be another step in that direction. It will drive people to apply more attention to detail and improve what they're doing generally, I think.
Yeah, I think that you're right. We're entering, whether we like it or not, into a period of extraordinary change, and Brexit is the immediate one. But as you say, support systems and political pressures are going to be pretty important, and trading pressures, and climate change in the end will impact on us all as well. Climate change targets.
Okay, should we move on to the next quick fire poll?
That'd be good.
So this one is go on, Nigel. Go on.
Body condition scoring, and it's I suppose it's going a bit deeper. A lot of us do it. Some of us quite formally and in quite a detailed way. Others in quite a broad brush sense. But it looks as if it's a key management tool, and certainly in that sort of run up to to lambing, from I suppose scanning time onwards, it's pretty crucial that you're aware of body conditions and are managing them. It's a similar question. Do you do it and do you share it? So a similar sort of poll. So it's going a bit deeper into that relationship with your advisor or your vet.
It's going to be interesting, this one, isn't it? It'd be interesting to compare with the last one. Yeah. And
I'm ashamed to say I don't share my body condition scores with my vet, so I'm obviously a failure. but that's not news.
It doesn't look there's much further to those bars to keep going on the right hand side, does it? They're nearly at their extreme, maybe at their extent. Okay, so yeah, a largish number, 21% of producers say yes, they share body condition score. No, a large percentage are saying they do body condition score, but they don't share with their advisors. Yeah, that's yeah.
In my world of hiding our results, but we've got quite a few that are sharing it. So the 13%.
So 13% say they are sharing, which is, I suppose you've got to draw on some positives, haven't you, really?
I think that's quite impressive. It's better than me, as I say. The vet advisors obviously don't get showered with information.
It would be really interesting if we'd have done this 5 years ago to see what the results would have been then.
It would. It really would. I suspect this is a significant growth, but I may be wrong. We've got quite a few vets, ticking the box right enough.
And it does show that the people here, 30% are body condition scoring used at scanning time, which again is a positive. And given all the discussions about SYNU syndrome and the importance of good nutrition being underpinning health, that to me is it would be always nice to see it higher, but it's a very positive score.
Is it not 45% not? Because it's A and B.
Say that again.
It's not 45% that are actually body condition.
It would be, yeah. Of course, it's 1 and 2 added together, isn't it? Of course,
it's really pretty impressive, really.
Yeah, 50. Yeah, that's.
But to me, it's one of these things that fits quite well with the routine if you can go quickly enough. With the scanner, and it's such a valuable time to understand where your use are.
There's another comment that's just come in as well relating to that. This is presumably from a vet or an advisor. I have clients that share their body condition score with me, but not at scanning time, usually at weaning time, when making decisions about cull use, etc. Well, again, it's a good time to score body condition, isn't it, at weaning time?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, and it could be a crucial decision point in setting the flock up correctly for the next season. So
yeah,
I don't think you can knock that approach.
Yeah, absolutely.
Got any other questions coming through?
There's quite a few questions coming in. You've got another slide in a moment on health planning, but let's just have a look at a few of these questions. There's some really good ones that's come in. There's where are we in terms of more general sheep advisors? I know this is all about health and therefore vet input, but is there room for generalist sheep advisors, especially in terms of grazing? Discuss.
Well, I would think there definitely is, and you could almost, grazing is a significant part of a sheep's world, isn't it? But I would say system expertise is something that's fallen away, and I think when I was young, there were systems experts in ADAS and in SAC, which were freely available. There still are one or two, but there's not very many. And some of these individuals had extraordinary knowledge and experience that could, an ability to actually create a relationship with farmers. And I suppose in some ways, are one of the things that we miss now in driving change. So I'd be really supportive of that being a bigger feature. I'm quite a believer in one-to-one support, because having some sort of trusted relationship allows you to take the difficult decisions and be honest about the challenges you face.
To be honest, I think, and this is meant to be a complimentary comment, not an offensive comment at all. But when I first started my sheep farming career a long time ago, some of the advisors that were appearing in the farming media, giving best practice advice, and at the time I was down in Somerset, and we used to have a wonderful experimental husbandry farm called Adas Liscombe on Exmoor there, and some of the advisors that used to come to our sessions are exactly the same advisors that are working on our sector today, and that we've even heard from earlier this morning as well. And there's been, we often talk about a lack of succession in farming, but there's definitely a lack of succession in terms of good quality sheep advisors and consultants. And it is something that we at the NSA are working on. We're hoping to have something to talk about at the back end of this year, really. But I can see that being an area in future that is going to be required and will relate to a lot of the new farm support programs that come along, post next year.
Yeah, well, hopefully you can crack that, Phil, because I think if we can actually get that succession, people, good advisors can be, really a game changer for the industry, really, and for individuals as well. They could make a real difference. And I think not just create solutions, but add real enthusiasm to change, which we need.
Well, that's stimulated some responses. Actually, there's a few more comments that have come in now after that comment. Hello. There are some of us out there. Problem is that farmers here don't see the value in paying for advice. They're used to getting advice for free.
Yeah, well, we're going to have to change our mindset, and I don't know how we get. Maybe we need to have some sort of step into it, and maybe there are schemes which could actually introduce us into that advisor relationship, and then afterwards, we'd have to take on the costs ourselves. But I think once you've built that relationship, you can understand the value of it and the value for paying for it.
There's two grassland related questions that have come in, really quite interesting. Following on from, they keep jumping up and down a moment, hold on. Following on from the grazing question and advisors, would there be scope for a grass management discussion group in the sheep sector like there is in the dairy sector, involving farmers, advisors and vets? And again, I would say, I'm sure you would agree with me, Nigel, but I would say absolutely there is, and maybe it probably needs to be really quite different to the ones that are running in the dairy sector, and there's probably going to need to be a much greater interaction between grassland management for productivity and grassland management for linking into public goods programs, elms and the like. It's going to be a very different situation, I think, in the sheep sector.
I think it will be. I totally agree with you, and I think it would be a fascinating job, because I think there are two very diverse sort of routes that you may go down with your grass management, or maybe within a unit you might have some areas that are managed for different reasons. And I'm afraid I also think that you've got to look at clean grazing strategies as well. So it's a really interesting area, and I think it would be pretty important that we actually get that sort of support. I'm not usually able to multitask. Phil's managing to pick up the questions, but I have picked up one question which did bother me a bit, because it says that advisors tell you to completely change your system when they give advice, and I think that is a real danger, that you don't want to have advisors that have one template that they actually go and apply to all their clients and say this is the ideal you should adopt. Advisors should be smart enough and knowledgeable enough to actually realize that there are different management goals in every farm, and different systems and different constraints, and you've got to actually come up with a unique approach which fits with those goals and constraints, and carries the shepherd or the farmer or the flock master with them. So that sort of advisor isn't what we need.
Do I've felt for a long time, really, Nigel, that we need good advisors and we need good consultants, but actually they need to be facilitators as well. And rather than coming on and tell people what they should be doing, the whole essence of good advice is about working with the farmer, and to an extent, getting to a point where the good ideas come from the farmer and enabled by the advisor.
Yeah, well, that to me is a smart approach, and you can look at that at an individual level. But I think if we look about industry change, having facilitators that work in a local or a regional sense with a group of farmers, and maybe you'll actually bring in technical expertise when their members or their group want it. You again would be a way of reaching what the wider community and getting everybody involved.
Mm. Let's take one more comment before we move on, because we are getting short of time now. But again, this is another really a big area of interest for me. Really, surely grazing, grassland management, and soil management conditions are the foundations of sheep management. I think, you know, for a long time, I think we've underestimated the value and the importance of soil and the value of a healthy soil to a good sward and the value of a good sward to the good health and nutrition of the sheep. You know, soil really is the foundation of so much of what we do, and it also is the foundation of ecology in a way. You know, all the stuff that we're being encouraged to do in terms of storing carbon, and looking after wildlife and habitats. You know, we always underestimate because we can't see it, I guess, but we always underestimate the value of soil. And I do think, again, it's already changing. I think that emphasis on soil is something that's going to change a lot more in years to come.
I'll give a short comment. I totally agree.
Thank you. Should we move on to your next slide? I think we're getting to the end of the presentation now, but yeah.
Yeah, this is really, just emphasizing that two-way flow of information and thoughts between advisors and vets and farmers is absolutely crucial if we're looking at active health planning. And today we've hopefully highlighted some of the the information we have on farm, which is there already, that we could use to create that dialogue and that interaction. And I think also we've got to look at I suppose health planning in a slightly different way. For many people, it's been a tick box for farm assurance, and there's no real gain from that. I think other levels are looking at it being a sort of best practice protocols for biosecurity and managing disease interventions or your vaccine program. So it's almost like a manual for a management manual of best practice. But for another group, and I think quite a lot of you are here today, it's about active health planning. It's about involving your advisor or your vet in your system and actually developing it together. And I suppose the plea is to actually push this to the limit, get the real value out of it. Look at targets and actually deliver change on farm. And maybe if we're looking at a cost issue, maybe standardizing protocols for biosecurity or for interventions or vaccines for a whole group of farmers makes perfect sense, with slight modifications from the vet, and investing in the active health planning, going to that level. And I think there's another slide after this which looks at biosecurity, because biosecurity, as was said this morning, is a dirty word, and none of us, or a lot of us, aren't very good at this. And this is the Shetland Islands Animal Health Scheme, and the Shetlands are good at biosecurity. I think they're so good that the Scottish Government was worried that they might fall foul of the European Court because it was a trading barrier that they had in place. But this is one of the few areas in the UK, I think, that is sheep scab free, and has been for a generation or more. And this is their protocols, and maybe it's a protocol that is actually of quite value. There's only one point of entry. There's only one port. There's a layerage where all sheep that come into Shetland are handled when they come off the boat, and they go through this health scheme protocol. Sheep scab, they're treated on the pier. There's a quarantine worm treatment on the pier with Zolvix. Enzootic abortion, they're blood tested on the pier. Mydivisna, they're blood tested, and CLA as well. And there's advice about fluke treatment with Closantel afterwards. And then there's isolation protocols, and there's follow-up testing protocols. There's about 500 or more sheep go into Shetland every year, probably mostly tups. And as I say, their health status as a community is probably the highest certainly in Scotland. If you look down the risk identification on the right-hand side, they're picking up enzootic abortion at both the first testing and the on-farm testing post-lambing. They're picking up midodrivin at low levels, and 33% of their flocks are screening for midodrivin, and they're all negative. So maybe the flock status midodrivin across the whole Shetland flock is quite good. And CLA, again, they're picking up CLA both at the pier and on-farm testing. And they're using the Western blot test to sort out inconclusives. So it's just a quick story to underline that flock security is really crucial if we're going to manage our health status, and you can do it. And but we've got to stick to the rules. And I suppose that's an area that we tend to think is dull, but it's actually quite important. So that's a final thought, I think. And Phil, I think, has got a few words to lift your spirits after my drab requirements on biosecurity.
Great. Thank you very much, Nigel. That was really, really good. And I've made a few notes as we've gone through, and I actually cheated a little bit, but I made a few notes as we went through this morning's session, which you'd expect anyway. And there just a few comments that I thought I'd try and make to wrap up. All of this conference has been about the health and welfare of sheep. And, so many times today we've heard that health has got a very close relationship with the welfare of sheep. It's not the be all and end all of welfare, and there's things that sit outside of the health arena, I guess, that affect welfare, things like transport, slaughter, castration, tailing, whatever it might be. But we know that for the sheep sector, health is probably the foundation of good welfare within our sheep flock. We know that sheep that are healthy and are in good welfare conditions improve our productivity and our profitability levels. At the same time, they reduce our environmental footprint. They give us an increased sense of pride, and that leads to more attention to detail, which helps to move things on even further. Good health and welfare does a lot to improve the image and the perception of our industry, both within the farming world, but within the society at large as well. And that in terms helps with policy support for our industry. And it will support the further development of our domestic market. And we know that health and welfare is going to be a really important aspect of trade development as we finish our departure from the European Union at the end of this year, I guess. So, it's important in so many different ways, really. There's almost a symbiotic relationship, I would say, between all of those things and sheep prices. The industry has to be profitable to enable it to invest. And with that investment, we know that that investment allows us to raise our game and further improve the health and the welfare and the conditions within which we keep our sheep. We've gone through probably pretty much all of today, apart from in Charles's opening remarks about Brexit. We've not mentioned Brexit once, which has been really quite a relief during today. But in terms of prices, I guess, as Charles said earlier this morning, we know that we could end up with a difficult time, irrespective of whether we get a deal agreed between ourselves and the European Union or not. There's likely to be some disruption for the first few months of 2021. No one really knows how long that is going to last for. But I would say that in the longer term, this industry is in really good stead for a successful future. If you look on the globe, on an atlas on the globe, the UK is a tiny island in comparison with most other nations, but we are the third largest exporter of sheep meat in the world. And that tells you something really powerful in my mind. It tells you that we're very, very good at sheep farming, and we've got the infrastructure, the processing, the exporters, everything is in place here for us to have a successful industry in the future. And I do believe that we can do that alongside the creation and the maintenance of a fantastic countryside, a great landscape, and alongside this, the future objective of nature recovery as well. We can get that balance right in this industry, I think, and be both a successful industry alongside delivering a whole range of public goods. So, I think there's, look out for possibly a bit of a rocky ride post the end of this year, but longer term, it's got to be good. And I think this has been a fantastic conference. I'd like to thank Nigel very much, and with that, I'll hand over to Charles. Charles.
Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Nigel. Just reiterate my thanks there for a really fascinating session. It comes to me now to conclude and summarise the day in total, and draw the conference to a close. Firstly, I think on behalf of everybody who has listened and been part of the audience today, I must thank all the speakers. We started off this morning with a really tremendous in-depth interactive session looking at how we safeguard responsible use of antibiotics, chaired very well by Rebecca and featuring Fiona and Leslie, two of the industry's key gurus on anything to do with sheep, two of the most knowledgeable and well thought of and respected people that I've had the pleasure to work with, and I'm sure that is extended through the length and breadth of the industry. They were joined on the panel by Claire Wise and Kevin Harrison, two what I'll describe as mucky boots farmers who have first-hand experience of how to implement some of the best practice on their farms, and two people who I felt gave really good examples of how implementing new and challenging new thinking that would challenge the norm has actually improved their businesses and improved the health and welfare of their sheep. It was really, really fascinating to listen to, and I've had several really good bits of feedback personally to me on how well you did in that session. So thank you to you people. The second session, ably chaired by my good friend Crosby and Vice Chairman, thank you for that, featured Sam Boone talking on genetics, Jasmeet on understanding and influencing behaviour, and Alex how we improve lamb survivability and performance. Nobody has spent more time in the last few years than myself trying to find out ways how we implement best practice on farms and are able to deliver that on farms. And some of the insights that Jasmeet gave us, particularly into nudge behaviour and the motivation, capability and opportunity theory, I think has left quite a few questions, but gives us quite a few opportunities as we move forward as the industry and with the pathway programme, how we try and implement change at a farm level. And it's really interesting to hear the comments about the carrot and stick approach and how we make sort of farmers take on board some of those things that they'll do for there. But what we really do today is have simple, cost-effective nudges. Nobody who knows me will be surprised to say I thank Sam Boone particularly for his contribution this morning. Having known and worked with Sam for too long, and as people know, I'm particularly interested in the genetic side of our industry, and I've spent my whole life trying to breed better sheep, failing miserably most of the time, but once or twice we've had a bit of success, and believe that I fundamentally believe that improved genetics and how we use them and how we disseminate and distribute them through the industry will have a major impact on animal health and welfare of sheep, but with benefits to the impact on the environment as well. And I thought it was really fascinating, the third part of that session with Alex, and reported on that, on the work that he's been doing. And it was sort of, I suppose, disappointing to me in that the conclusions that he's reached from the survey were that the results for lamb survivability have not changed in the last 20 years. Despite the best efforts of everybody who's involved in it to try to improve it, because it makes sense to improve it, a lot of it is due to factors beyond farmers' control at times. And it's an area of work that we really do need to investigate more, to look into the real causes. And I think there were some key things there that people obviously in the have picked up with their questioning and want to appreciate and want to learn more to know how they can actually improve lamb survivability in their own businesses. I think that work will again need even more investigation and more interrogation as we try to find ways to develop and disseminate the key findings from that. So thank you for those people. This afternoon, we've had the dynamic duo, as they've been described to me to some people on social media or otherwise. And I don't know how they could describe either of those two young gentlemen as dynamic. As Phil pointed out, to a lot of the faces that we see in our industry have been around for quite a long time. And I think he will have to be apologising and buying flowers to certain people who he may have inadvertently upset with mentioning that they've been around longer than sort of time immemorial. To me, in our industry and for a lot of other things, it's about people. It's about getting the the right people in the right place at the right time. I believe in our industry that we have some fantastic people. A lot of the people who we've seen and contributed to today are part of that. And if we get the right people in the right place at the right time, I genuinely believe it will give us a really good opportunity to keep making progress and keep our place as we see it at the minute. Now, some of the other bits of housekeeping that I have to mention before I finally sum up. I could ask everybody to complete their feedback forms under the feedback icons on the left-hand side of your menus. I must remind everybody that the conference platform is available for 3 months from today. And please encourage people to come back and revisit it and reconnect and disseminate some of the learnings and some of the really good advice that we've had spread out today. For anybody that's not had the opportunity yet to apply for their AMTRA points, please do so by completing the form on the left-hand side of the menu. I come now to the social butterfly competition, something that we thought would be quite useful to try and encourage people to participate and do this made back by the social media things. Just to say, we've been absolutely amazed by the contributions of you all today, and are really blown away by the interaction that we've had. Now, we set out to be a competition, and with any sort of competition, you have to devise a way of making sort of a winner. Unfortunately, today we had 6 people who all scored the same amount of points. So I'd like to particularly congratulate Gemma Rawlins, Charlie Dodd, Sean Morris, Mark Platts and Paul Crawford for their contributions. But by being pulled with a name out of the at first by Liz and Heather, I'd like to congratulate Heidi Platts on winning the social butterfly competition today. We'll be in touch to discuss how we get the lavish prizes to you, but I'm sure the Colostrum Refractor will be a very worthwhile part of what you've heard today. I'd like to thank everybody for attending, and I hope you've enjoyed it. I also have to have a few personal thanks to people who've made today possible and as successful as what I'm getting feedback already has been. The event team, who took on the mantle of organising this today digitally. As you know, we usually have a physical conference every 2 years, but when that option was taken away from us, we set about trying to do something. I'd be really interested to see the feedback that we get, that the initial feedback that I'm getting from my sources are very pleased with how it's gone. I do apologise, we did have a few technical issues this morning, but in anything new like this, you are always going to get something of that. I'd like to think we overcame them during the course of the day, and the afternoon session, the interactive part of it worked very, very well. So in the event team, Heather, Sarah, Amna, Ben and Johnny, for all their input and help and expertise with sort of hand-holding to those of us of a certain age who are not technically efficient, like Phil and Nigel and myself. I appreciate your help, I appreciate your input, and we thank you for your work. As we wind up SHAWG today, and this is our final conference, and as we move to become part of the new Ruminant Health and Welfare, it would be remiss of me not to thank anybody and everybody who has contributed to the success of SHAWG since its inception. Phil mentioned Peter Baby, the initial chairman, and I thank him for his expertise and steadfast way of leading the group initially. And all the other people who have sat around that table during the course of our meetings and have contributed, but on an individual basis or the organisations that they represent. It's that wide and broad church. We have over 35 member organisations or individual contributors, and meetings of often between 20 and 30 people. And it's that sort of friction that we create in those meetings that has led us to develop the course of action that we've done over the time and create and benefit from some of the success that we've had done. I think I mentioned it earlier, so that it was really, really, really positive and important to myself and the people who have been involved in SHAWG to receive the recognition that we did from the CVOs is a testament to the work that everybody's done over the years to help and contribute and to put SHAWG to the place it was. Now, it's always really difficult in these sort of situations to thank individuals, but I must mention Liz King by name. She's been the secretary of this now nearly ever since I've been chairman, taking over from Liz Jennifer, who helped pull SHAWG and the new terms and conditions together. And Liz stepped into the breach and has provided me the secretarial support, help and advice during that time. She does a phenomenal job, often without reward or recognition, but I personally thank you, Liz, and I'm sure everybody else on the group would like to pass that on to you as well. I'd also at this time like to wish the Ruminant Health and Welfare Group every success in the future. I know in Nigel and in Caroline, they have two really tremendously talented and enthusiastic people to make this work. They are really, really keen advocates of animal health and welfare and want to progress and make progress and help develop our industry. The theme of today has been world leading. And I'd like to think that the legacy that SHAWG can leave for the Ruminant Health Welfare Group to take on and take with their mantle and to build on the work that we've done, especially the latest SHAWG report and the priorities that Nigel so quite rightly picks up on are a key fundamental and the basis for the work moving forward. It'll be really interesting to see how some of the surveys that the Ruminant Health and Welfare run and the feedback they get and the development of the syndromes, as we've heard mentioned this afternoon, link in and can be developed and added on to the work that we've done as SHAWG in the past. Now, I know some want to change everything and very quickly, but I believe there is a real basis for Ruminant Health and Welfare to build on with the control change that I believe in so passionately and all the enthusiasm that is undoubtedly out there within our industry. I genuinely believe that in the UK, we have a world-leading sheep industry, and in particular, are world leaders for animal health and welfare. And I'm also absolutely certain that if we as an industry cooperate and coordinate our efforts, we will continue to make progress and protect our world-leading status. Thank you everybody else for participating. I wish everybody to stay safe in these uncertain times and hope when time allows and or restrictions allow to meet up personally with as many of you as I possibly can in the future. Thank you very much indeed.